Hello all. As I draw to the end of my reviews of 1970s dystopian science fiction movies, we come to one that's kind of an oddity. It's really more of a horror movie than science fiction, but it is based on a science fiction novel and had been previously made. I'm talking about 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was previously made in 1956 and based on Jack Finney's 1955 novel just called The Body Snatchers. The 1978 version stars Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Jeff Goldblum, and Veronica Cartwright, and Leonard Nimoy. And it's an update which, in some ways, is closer to the novel. It talks about how or rather shows how the alien seed pods come to Earth as sort of star seeds, as it were, and how they adapt, and it's a little more intricate in its telling of that part of the story, but I must be honest, I prefer the 1956 version. I find the 1978 version dull. I find a lot of the acting was flat. This was one of Jeff Goldblum's first films, and he really doesn't do that good a job, to be honest. He got a lot better very quickly and was better, by the mid 80s and early 90s, he became really terrific. And of course, he stars in one of my favorite cult films, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai from 1988, where he plays the character in New Jersey. And he's not terrible in this film. He just seems like he's just learning acting, and you can kind of tell. The plot varies from the 1956 original People in a Small Town, which I think they called Santa Mira, which is supposed to be somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, start acting strange. And like a woman tells Kevin McCarthy, the main character, that her husband isn't her husband. He says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, he looks like him, but he's not acting like him." And he goes and he sees the guy, and he's basically the same person, but he seems to have lost all of his emotions. He's just a cold, sort of robotic person now. And the same thing sort of happens in this movie. Brooke Adams, his husband, is a writer, and he's looking forward to going to see a Golden State Warriors in the playoffs. And the next night he comes home and he tells her that he had to give away his playoff ticket because he doesn't have time. He has some sort of meeting that he has to go to, and she sees him kind of acting weird. He's going out and he's talking to garbage men in the middle of the night, and they like indicate somewhere, and he goes with them, and she's wondering what the hell's going on. She contacts her friend, who is played by Donald Sutherland, and says, "My husband's not my husband." He says, "What do you mean?" She says, he gave away these Warrior tickets that he was looking forward to going to see the game, and he's acting strange, and he's going out in the middle of the night and not telling me where he's going, and he thinks, she's just exaggerating. I think he's a psychiatrist, actually. And she's Leonard Nimoy is the psychiatrist. She tells him too. And he says, she's just acting out, and, it's not, couples have these problems, and, it's not uncommon, and, she's exaggerating, basically. But the next day, she and Sutherland see something odd. There's a man running down the street, and as a nod to the original movie, Kevin McCarthy reprises his role, and he's yelling the same thing that he was at the end of the movie. "You're next! They're coming! You're next! Something horrible!" And nobody will listen to him. And he goes down the street, and he's struck by a car and killed. And the police, while they arrive, they don't seem to help any. They don't really take any notice. They're just telling people, "Go, move on. There's nothing to see here," and Donald Sutherland is very confused by this. He goes to a party the next night, and the same night actually, and he calls the police, and he's telling them about this accident and where it took place, and they don't seem interested. They're not interested in investigating the accident whatsoever. Meanwhile, he meets up with Jeff Goldblum, who's complaining about a kind of Stephen King-ish writer who seems to be getting a lot of attention while his own work isn't, and he resents that, and he's kind of blathering on while he's trying to tell him about what's going on, and he's not really interested. He's not paying any attention. He's too wrapped up in his own, things or problems. And events, proceed much more slowly in this 1978 version than they do in 1956. The things go pretty rapidly. People soon discover, that people are not behaving right, and the whole town seems to be taken over. And eventually, they find a gigantic alien seed pod in Kevin McCarthy's apartment, and there's a thing inside that's kind of spongy, but it's starting to turn into him, into a duplicate of him. And he manages to destroy it, but they find that there are more seed pods around him. What happened is when people go to sleep, they're taken over and replaced by these alien plants, basically, who look like people, and they behave sort of like people, but they don't have any emotion. They don't have either love or hate, and they just want to take over, basically. Very thinly veiled sort of Martians as communists plot. They're taking over the police. They take over the positions of power. There's no way out of the town, and there's no way to escape these things. And eventually, by hiking onto a truck that's carrying these plants, that they're going to take them up to Oregon and to Washington State, McCarthy manages to escape, but he's yelling this warning to people, you're next, you're next. A very good study in paranoia. 1978 version, not so much as far as I'm concerned. It's interesting. The special effects are good. As I said, it clings a little more closely to the original stream. It's very slow paced, for one thing. They don't even find a seed pod till about 40 minutes into this movie, and it's only about 2 hours long. So you've already wasted basically half the movie wondering what's going on, and they finally find a seed pod that's in a spa, and it's slowly turning into a replica of a human. I think it's turning into a replica of Jeff Goldblum. And then they go back, it's gone. They can't find it. So they can't convince anybody that it's real because it disappears. Leonard Nimoy, again, is telling them, oh, you're just exaggerating things, and none of this is real. And he's trying to convince them that they're all basically hallucinating, and these seed pods don't exist. But they do, of course, and they do start taking over, just as in the original movie. A guy who works at a Chinese laundry where Donald Sutherland often goes in and says, my wife, that's not my wife. And he's like, I don't understand. What do you mean? He says, look like her, but not my wife. And he doesn't get it. But slowly more and more people start saying this, and so he starts taking notice. And Brooke Adams, who was the first one who told him, she told him her husband was one of these things, that she was acting funny, says, they're all around us, and, I don't know who these people are. And you see these people acting kind of robotically. They're just kind of marching along, and they all seem like they're like one giant entity, because they've all been taken over by these alien seed pods. And they're starting to do the same thing that they did in the original movie. They're putting seed pods onto trucks, and they're going to take them to Oregon and Washington and other states. Some are going to go east. They're also loading them onto ships, and they discover that there's this is different. They discovered there's basically a grow house where they're growing these things in the outskirts of San Francisco, or like near the Oakland docks. And Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams see this. And this was a little bit of a stretch of the imagination, but by cutting down some of the grow lights, they explode and set the place on fire. And so they at least have destroyed this facility. But then the seed pods, the seed creatures, become aware of them, and they start shrieking in this like high-pitched shriek that they use, and that's scary. And they're coming after them. They're trying to get away. Donald Sutherland hears the Amazing Grace playing from a ship. And he says, there's a ship, we can get out of here. But when he goes down to look at it, and they're trying to keep awake, so they're like taking drugs and trying to keep themselves awake at all costs, because once you go to sleep, you're taken over. You can't help it. And then you're dead and the seed pod is alive. It takes over your personality and your mind, but they're emotionless. He talks to one of these creatures, and it tells them, we came from outer space, and we colonize different worlds, and we adapt, and you'll wake up to a world where there's no pain and no fear and no war and no hatred, but a better world, as it were. But of course, to him, it's not going to be a better world, because they have no emotion. They don't have love either. He tells Brooke Adams that he loves her, and she says she loves him, and they are going to try to escape on the ship, and then he goes down to the docks and he sees they're loading seed pods onto the ship. The music was kind of a lure. When he goes back, now Brooke Adams has fallen asleep and she's been taken over, and she makes the shriek and thinks on him. He tries to escape somehow into the city. You see more and more of these people, even children, are kind of being taken over, and the seed pods are being loaded up onto trucks and buses, and they're going to roll off into different states and different parts of the state, just as in the original. Then you see Donald Sutherland working back at his old job. He worked at the Department of Health as a health inspector. And so he's back there, and he's kind of just sort of going through the functions of his job. And you figure that he's kind of, hiding out from these people. And then he walks out into the street as they all walk out into the street, kind of, mimicking their behavior. And Veronica Cartwright, who was one of the other people, she was Jeff Goldblum's girlfriend, sees him, and she says, Tom, or whatever his name is, and he lets the shriek, and he's been taken over. I thought that ending was disappointing, and I'll tell you why. Because if the protagonist has been taken over, what's the point? That the whole thing about the original was one person got away, and of course nobody will believe him, but he got away, and that's, if it doesn't happen, that for me sort of ruins the film. It's not a terrible adaptation. As I said, the special effects are pretty good. The cinematography is good. Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams are both good, as is Veronica Cartwright. Jeff Goldblum is kind of not great. He's okay. I mean, he's just not doesn't do a very good acting job, in my opinion. But again, as I said, this is an early film for him, and I do not blame him for being in the process where he was just learning his craft. He got much better very quickly, which says a lot. But again, for me, this is not a terrific remake, and it's been remade several more times. I think one of them is called The Invasion of the Pod People, and I think that happened in 2012. There's probably going to be more remakes because it's just a really good story and an interesting story. But I didn't particularly care for this one.